Hi, friends. So, the purpose of today's hangout is to have a bit of a casual chat talking about peace and conflict studies. And this is honestly going to be a lot of fun for me because, just in case anyone at this point still doesn't know, I am a graduate student studying peace and conflict studies myself. Specifically, I'm studying peace and conflict studies at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And I'm doing that as an online student while I am living and working pretty much wherever I can find work. It's a very nomadic lifestyle, if I'm being completely honest, but it's also a lot of fun. And the reason why I am interested in peace and conflict studies myself is that I am a passionate humanist who cares very deeply about the ways that people interact and the things that make it possible for people to live better lives. And for me, one of the big things that determines, I guess, what a better life is whether or not that life is lived without being touched by violence, or if it's impossible to live a life without being touched by violence, touched by as little violence as possible. And I have been studying peace and conflict studies informally for a handful of years now. It started in my second year of college when I was just becoming a sophomore. I was introduced to the field actually when I was a freshman, and I decided to sign up for a class to see what it was like. I was told that it was something that I would probably be interested in, since at that point I was already an atheist. I was interested in understanding how it was that people interacted and the ways that we could study the interactions that people have and that societies have. And I was told about a little course that was an introduction to the field, and I took it at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, which is also where I went to undergraduate school, in addition to where I am now as a graduate student. And I fell in love with it right away. By the time I was a senior in college, I was already mostly finished with all of the stuff that I needed to do, so I wasn't able to switch. I had already studied too much history for me to be able to switch my majors, but it was something that I was still very passionate about. And when I decided to enroll in graduate school, I figured that it was the only thing I really wanted to study. Peace and conflict studies is a field of study that's generally considered a social science. And what this means for people who are unfamiliar with that term is that it's generally a field of study that concerns itself with society, with individuals, and with the ways that people interact with one another. Other social sciences include fields like anthropology, communication studies, history, political science, and even public health, as far as public health can be studied and quantified and researched. The purpose of peace and conflict studies is obviously in the name. It's a way for people to quantify and for people to try and understand how it is that societies interact and the sort of conflicts that societies continually find themselves embroiled in. And the idea that it's possible to study and quantify every single conflict strikes me as something that's a little bit problematic for a variety of reasons. But generally speaking, you can try to find other commonalities that some types of conflicts have, and you can apply methodological fields of study and methodological frameworks to conflicts. And that's generally what it is that scholars of peace and conflict studies do. They look at different conflicts, they analyze what they have in common, and they try to understand how to prevent conflicts, at the very least conflicts that are so serious that they turn to violence. Because something that a lot of people don't realize is that many people who study peace and conflict studies look at conflicts as something that's not inherently negative, but something that's rather neutral. Now, the problem is when violence starts to emerge. And this is a pretty common thing in lots of different conflicts. So obviously, the whole purpose of peace and conflict studies is to try and figure out, at the very least, if you're going to be applying peace and conflict studies to the real world and the conflicts, is presumably to try and figure out ways to reduce violence and ways to prevent violence from emerging if it hasn't yet. Now, there are different fields of study that also have, I guess, somewhat similar goals. And specifically, some of the big ones that come to my mind personally are ones like military studies, which is almost kind of the opposite in a sense, but rather military studies is the study of the application of military force. And it's an analytical way of looking at conflicts and trying to figure out how to reduce them and how to end them as quickly as possible through the application of force. Now, another, I guess, more peaceful way of looking at this, another more peaceful study is peace communications. communications, which is actually what I myself want to do. It's what I want to be involved in, and it's what I'm trying to study. And what peace communications is peace communications is a subdiscipline of both peace and conflict studies and communication studies that looks at the sort of rhetoric and language that people and societies use both when they are in peace times and when they are in embroiling and developing conflicts. And the reason why I like peace communications is that, as many people know, I'm someone with a very heavy emphasis on communication. I like understanding the way it is that people interact with each other and the way that it is that people talk to each other. So that's the reason why communication studies and peace and conflict studies mix so much in my mind. A lot of what I write about and a lot of what I talk about relates to communication and it relates to perception and optics. And these are things that I feel very passionate about, especially if you guys check out Wonder Lady's channel, which I'll be putting in the comments section after the video is over. Hey Godless Iowan, hey Wonder Lady, hey Bish, hope you guys are having a great night so far. I'm glad that people are actually checking this out. I was a little bit nervous. But some of the things that I like to do and some of the things that I like to talk about are things that directly relate to communication. I like understanding the ways that it is that people analyze and perceive things, and that's a heavy part of communication. So in order for me to get really talking about peace and conflict studies for the purpose of this conversation, I had some notes prepared, but I'm actually going to skip over to the end of those notes for just a second, so that way people can understand what it is that people who study what I study do. If you are not an academic, if you are not in academia, you can get a lot of different jobs studying peace and conflict studies. A lot of people, when they think of peace and conflict studies, they actually think of it in a corporate sense. And for what it's worth, I'm sorry I made you cry, but I'm not sorry about the context in which you were crying, because you deserve to be shouted out and for people to state how much they appreciate you and the content you make. GI, you deserve that because you're a dope dude. But corporate peace and conflict studies and corporate applications of the things that I'm learning include people going into work like being in HR and mediating conflicts directly on the ground. Other sorts of things include people being recruiters, because when people are trying to recruit applicants, when people are trying to recruit potential employees, they have to think very carefully about the sort of people that they're going to be hiring. And the sort of frameworks that people who study peace and conflict studies develop are actually really useful in the business world. And that's something that a lot of people don't always realize. What I personally want to do, at least for a little while, is probably something like join the State Department and apply peace and conflict studies to diplomacy and to international deal making. And the reason why I want to do that is because what I'm actually specifically studying as of right now in the context of peace and conflict studies is joint military-civil interaction. And what that means is I study the ways that civil society and the ways that militaries interact, and how it is that they can cooperate peacefully, how it is that they can have a clear delineation between who does what, and that sort of thing. And hi, Mrs. I'm glad you're here. I advertised the Women of Deconversion live stream that's happening later tonight. I'm going to listen in. Super excited. I'm honestly just kind of living for this right now, you guys. This is actually really exciting for me. I've never done a solo live stream that people like actually commented on at the same time. It's really neat. But a lot of other people who are studying peace and conflict studies and who want to work in government, want to work in different capacities. I actually kind of want to be an elected official one day, and I want to be someone who gets elected on the premise and on the sort of electoral background that I am an experienced peacemaker and peacekeeper, and in today's hyper-partisan politics, there is a need for that. There's a need for someone who is willing to look beyond labels and beyond identity and actually talk with people as if they're human beings. And I'm honestly really excited about building the sort of experience that will help me gain the sort of like ability to honestly say that, and yes, Bij, reconciliation does fall under this category. Bringing people together to talk about war and how war affected them and how they can move on beyond that is a very significant component of international peace and conflict studies, and also international just deal making and diplomacy on a grander scale. Now, I want to talk about that. I'm going to be talking about it in a future live stream, and it's going to be very exciting for me because I have family members who've done that sort of work. I have people that I can talk to in my community who have participated in that, and that's a really exciting thing. It's really nerve-wracking for a whole bunch of different reasons, but there's a whole lot of work that can be done in peace and conflict studies outside of academia. Now, I personally think that more academic institutions need to open up, I guess, programs that explore different aspects of peace and conflict studies. And peace and conflict studies is actually two different studies that have been fused together. There's peace studies, and then there's conflict studies. And these are things that exist on their own in addition to being, I guess, fused together into this sort of almost insanely ambitious field of study that people like me are studying. It's more common for people to see peace and conflict studies together in like one academic program as opposed to split up now. But for a really long time, it was easy for people to find things like conflict studies and peace studies as opposed to the two once they've been sort of mushed together. And it's really interesting for me to try and think about exploring conflict as a field of academia in and of itself without also studying peace. And that's something that I can't really wrap my mind around personally, because I've always been interested in the sort of middle ground, as in like when conflicts are actually happening, but peacemaking and peace building are happening at the same time, because these are not things that happen in isolation. Every time there's a conflict, especially once a conflict has reached a certain breaking point, there are peacemaking efforts that are going on behind the scenes. And it's really easy for people to see and for them to focus on the, I guess, nitty-gritty of conflict, and for things like, I guess, military studies to take the floor, and for people to focus on the violence as opposed to the sort of quiet democracy and diplomacy that's happening. Thank you. This is really fun, and I'm also like high-key really nervous, but I'm taking my time. I'm exploring this. I think it's a really important thing to talk about. And ultimately, what I really want to do with this particular weekly series is actually, I guess, just explore how it relates to humanism, because that's one of the big things that I really care about. As people know, I consider myself far more of a humanist than I consider myself an atheist. I think that both are extremely important, and I think that both play critical roles, especially in the future of humanity. But personally, I think that there are a lot of people who are making better arguments for things like atheism than I can make. So I want to focus on I want to focus on humanism. I want to focus on the human aspects, and I want to talk about the real people that are being affected by things like conflicts and by things like religion. I actually want to study, if I have to study conflicts specifically, what I really want to study is how religion can be used as both a tool to make and exacerbate conflict, but also a tool to rebuild relationships. And that's something that's a very interesting thing for me to focus, because for a while I was an anti-theist. I know that I have gotten frustrated with anti-theists in the past, but it's because like I was an anti-theist for a while, and I don't think I was as good an anti-theist as other people, including people here who might call themselves an anti-theist were, because I focused more on the anti-theism than I did on the humanistic impacts of anti-theism, because anti-theism is a humanistic position. And I've expressed this before when I've talked about trying to gain a more nuanced position towards anti-theism. But the reality is there's a valid reason for people to become anti-theistic, but at the same time, religion can be used to rebuild relationships. And it's frustrating to use something like that to rebuild relationships, but I'm operating as someone who's a pragmatic thinker, and I want to use what I can. I want to study what I can to help rebuild relationships and to help people become communities and repair the divides that hurt them in the past. And if that involves working with a religion, I am willing to do that. It's frustrating for me because I do wish, at the very least sometimes, that I could be like, yeah, religion is just bad. But that's not the way my mind works, and that's not the way most other people's minds work. And I am a pragmatic person in my own funny way. But there's a lot of very important ideas that talk about peace and conflict studies. Sorry, I had a brain fart for a second there. There are a lot of really important things to talk about in the context of peace and conflict studies. There are ideas like the difference between negative and positive peace that are worth discussing. And these are ideas that a lot of people already understand. These are ideas that are fairly common and that are fairly well understood now. But we have to remember that for a very long time, it wasn't. And for those of you who don't know, if you've never heard the difference between negative peace and positive peace, generally speaking, negative peace refers to the sort of pseudo calmness that appears when there's no overt conflicts. It's when people are not actively and brutally fighting each other, but at the same time, there's no real mechanisms that people can trust that talk about things like peaceful conflict resolution and peaceful conflict work. I had to think for a second there. Doing a live stream by yourself is really fun, guys. And yes, negative peace is exactly what's going on with North and South Korea. People are blind to the conflict that's still going on. And it's easy for people to think that they're not blind to the conflict when we hear it talked about. But the reality is that's a perfect example of a negative peace. There's no war going on right now. So people are looking at the situation. They're like, yeah, this is, I guess, sustainable. People aren't really dying right now. So it's fine enough for the second. But positive peace is a whole different thing. And positive peace refers to not only is there no active fighting, but also there are mechanisms that people can trust. And there are processes that people can rely on that will reliably transform and reduce conflicts. And it's incredible when people are aware of this difference. I feel like people are more and more aware of it now, as I mentioned before, because this idea in modern day discourse has become pretty common. And it's really neat now that something that's so essential in peace and conflict discourse is as commonly understood as it is right now. I've worked as a substitute teacher before, and I've discussed these concepts with students, and students could actually articulate the differences. Now, if you're going to ask them the specific minutia, such as like, what constitutes a mechanism by which conflicts can be reliably transformed, can be reliably worked on, can be reliably resolved? That's going to be a little bit trickier because people can say things like, oh yeah, the courts can be a good way to do this, but obviously the courts have flaws. Justice needs to be democratized, which, by the way, if you guys haven't checked out Wonder Lady and I's latest weekly episode, we talked a little bit about this. We talked a whole lot about justice. It was a really fun chat. I really loved it. We haven't decided what we're going to be doing for this Wednesday, which is probably a problem. But we've talked about these sorts of things over on her channel because these are the sorts of things that I want to talk about. These are the sorts of things that I want people to notice and to think about, especially humanists, because I think that humanists have the potential to be a fantastic force for justice and to be some of the most active peace and conflict studies people. And it's incredible to me to see people like you guys who are here listening to me chat and who want to learn about these things, but don't know what sort of research is out there, don't know what sort of materials out there. That's the whole purpose of me doing this show. And I'm so excited that there are going to be people who are going to listen. And I'm going to develop myself as a speaker and as a presenter. But these are just some of the things that I want to talk about. Another one of the critical ideas to modern day peace and conflict studies is the idea of sustainable peace. And sustainable peace refers to the idea that peace itself can be fragile and can be, I guess, prone to collapsing. And this is an easy thing to think about, but when you think about it a little bit more in depth, you start to realize that if peace can be crumpled fairly easily in certain contexts, there has to be a sort of peace that is stronger than that. And that's the peace that's sustainable. These are the sorts of pieces. I'm using pieces plural. I don't know if that's the right plural of peace, but I'm using that to sort of explain this, where there is a piece that's more difficult for people to collapse, that can take a little bit more of a punch than just collapsing because of one single moment of frustrated violence. And this is a really important concept that people are aware of. Pieces, yes. This is a really interesting concept that people are aware of intuitively, but people are not fully able to articulate. And that is where a lot of people, especially peace communicators, like me come in and try to talk about this in ways that make sense. And this is obviously a developing thing. It's a thing we have to work on. And obviously, I'm not the #1 best communicator out there, but I am working on it and I'm having fun while I'm doing it because these are things that I care about. This is something that when I wake up in the morning thinking that this is what I'm going to do for a living, that's something that excites me. And that's something that's really interesting about peace and conflict studies, especially because there are tons of subdisciplines within peace and conflict studies. Some of the more common ones are peace communication, peace economics, and peace education. And I'm someone who has a little bit of experience in peace education. For those of you who are curious, peace economics refers to, I guess, sort of subdiscipline of economics and peace and conflict studies that makes the economy and makes the focus of the economy sustainable justice for everyone involved and for people to be able to make a fair and good living while also participating in the economy meaningfully, lawfully, and justly. And that's a very interesting field. If I was a more economically minded person, I would definitely focus more on that. I feel like there does need to be a focus on that. And it's very interesting because there are people who just sort of intuitively know and understand this sort of thing. I would say that people who are progressives on the economy have a sort of intuitive understanding of peace economy that, and I guess the economics of peace, that compel them to create better jurisdictions and better legislation than currently exists. And I don't know how many of them you'd be able to go up to and be like, hey, are you a student of peace economics? But a lot of this is not something that is necessarily unintuitive or something that people need to learn, which is actually one of the more interesting things about this. A lot of people understand the sort of optics of peace and conflict studies and the optics of ideas that stem from peace communication and peace and conflict studies without ever being taught it. When I gave a presentation on nonviolent communication, I pointed out that the purpose of nonviolent communication isn't to give people new skills, but rather it's to frame them. Imagine someone going up to you and talking about that. Do you have time to talk about our Lord and Savior, economics? But a lot of the purpose of peace and conflict studies isn't to give people new skills. It is to give people a sort of mental framework and to give people the sort of intuitive knowledge and the vocabulary to properly express ideas that people already understand. And that's one of the things that I personally love about peace and conflict studies. When I go into classrooms talking about peace and conflict studies, I'm not gaining new skills. I'm gaining vocabulary, and I'm learning how to reframe the sorts of things that I already do in a way that is intuitive to human relationships, and in a way that's intuitive to peaceful interactions between people from different identities, people from different social groups. And it's really important that more people start to realize this and start to communicate it. And it doesn't just have to be peace and conflict studies. Communication studies, which is something that I'm hugely passionate about as well, is a field of study that's already really good at this. It's good at giving people the framework from which they can understand that ethical communication is important, that ethical framing of their relationships and of their day-to-day interactions matters. And these are things that I'm incredibly excited by. And these are things that academia does really well. Unfortunately, academia is kind of really bad at communicating to people outside of academia, especially if they're trying to not look condescending. It's really difficult. And I've had the sorts of conversations, especially in historical circles, where people are just like really condescending to people who aren't in the field and to people who aren't in academia. It's people who don't know the sort of linguistics and sort of jargon that people use. It's incredibly frustrating. And it's something that people, especially academics, need to work on. But to our credit, we're trying. We're doing the best that we can to lose the sort of preconditioning that we've been given through a variety of means to be condescending to people who don't understand the sorts of experiences that we have and sort of research that we've read. There, like most fields nowadays, have a sort of hyphenated identity where some people are also like Someone is a type of scientist. Say they are a physicist. They are a physicist communicator because they are someone who works in both the public and private. Or there's someone who works in both, like, in the private in two different public in two different senses. They work in academia, which is generally a sort of public institution, and they also work with people who aren't in academia. And that's something that I really like. I really like the idea of like historical communicators and science communicators, but also like there is a part of this that comes off as kind of condescending. And as I mentioned with history, this isn't just something that's limited to the sciences. This is something that's kind of a problem in all academic fields, although there are differences to just how much of a problem this is in certain academic fields. What I want to do with this specific weekly series is I don't want to be condescending. I'm not going to be pretending to give people new skills or like things, yeah, public and private face. Like, I'm not going to be giving people new skills. At most, what I'm going to be doing is giving them new information and new ways with which they can explicitly learn to change how they think. Because a lot of violent communication is sort of intuitively learned. And it's frustrating and it's difficult to try and undo that. I feel like this got really off track, but this is a good thing. This is an organic conversation and I like it a lot. But like, there is a need for people to change how it is that we communicate. And it's partially because we glorify violent communication. There are certain aspects of our culture and certain aspects of how it is that the media communicates with the public that glorify violent communication and that glorify confrontation. And confrontation isn't actually necessarily violence. So that's another thing that's going to have to be unpacked at some point. But a lot of the ways with which things like confrontation are framed and they're looked at implies that there's a certain level of violence to them, and that normalizes the violence. I really appreciate that because I don't feel like I have nice teeth. I actually don't know how high up the screen is. I am having an interesting sort of idea because right now I don't want to look at my face on the YouTube screen. If I did, I would be incredibly distracted. So I have the top chat pulled up at the top of the screen so I can look at and read the comments and respond to them while also not seeing enough of myself to be distracted. Because if I did, it would be very hard for me to focus. And I do think it would be extremely, extremely beneficial if someone smarter and a better communicator than myself had to teach politicians ideas like, hey, you shouldn't put party over country, and you shouldn't put ideology over real life human beings. Because this is something that a lot of politicians need to learn. There are good politicians out there. There are politicians who understand this intuitively. The problem is that they aren't very popular. And sometimes when they get popular, it kind of like, it becomes almost a problem. And it's really frustrating. I'm going to have better examples of this next time because I'm taking notes right now. I don't know if you guys can see it, but I'm taking notes right now. My hands are down, so you shouldn't be able to. I'm taking notes on what I'm going to be talking about in the future and on things that I'll be able to focus on, so that way I can have a more focused stream. Because right now, this is a very fun stream of consciousness for me. And I'm not pretending that this is going to be like super educational or anything, but I do think that this is going to be a neat way for me to start to try to gain more experience teaching people who are not traditional students, teaching people who in some cases do have college educations and in some cases are going to college. I want to try to be an effective advocate for my field. And my field is so broad that that's actually kind of an intimidating effort. And it's a lot of fun for someone like me because honestly, I love live streaming. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed live streaming. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed just like recording and having a conversation with people. It's so much fun, you guys. One of the big things I actually want to do with this is I do want to encourage more academically minded voices and people who are a little bit more nervous about presenting to people who may or may not be in their same field and having conversations with them. I want to show people how to do that and how to make it fun. So I'm hoping that as my audience grows bigger and as I become a more experienced presenter, both by myself and with other people, that I'm going to be able to explore these sorts of concepts well, and I'm going to be able to make a case for people in other fields, people who are historians, people who are sociologists, yes, people who are scientists, to explore. You absolutely could, Beej. That is a thing you could totally do. I would be so down. Maybe next week that's what's going to happen. There's just going to be a giant fight in the comment section. And I'm going to have to figure out a way to both stay on task and also mediate the conflict, because that would be fun. I really like this. This has been a lot of fun today. But there's a lot of really important ideas that I want to try to communicate to people who don't have the privileges of being able to study peace and conflict studies, whether they are in college studying something else or they don't have the means to go to college. I want to show people what peace and conflict studies looks like. I want to show them the sort of ideas that peace and conflict studies scholars are studying and are discussing in our own private circles. And the reality is, I feel like peace and conflict studies as a sort of academic field is probably a little bit more open and accessible to the public than other fields might be. But there's still a lot of stuff that is out there that the public just doesn't have access to. And over time, I want to start to sort of democratize and publicize that sort of information. It's not going to be anything like secret, but it's going to be the sort of materials that we discuss in our own circles that in some cases we don't really feel comfortable discussing with people who don't have the same sort of experience as we do. Because in this field, you are oftentimes dealing with controversial ideas. You're dealing with people who have controversial viewpoints. It's a frustrating thing, especially if you aren't the sort of person who can give these people a platform and listen. And this doesn't mean agreeing. As people in this community know, you can have someone fairly analyze and explicitly state their viewpoints, disagree with them, and like be able to give them a minor platform where you can debate their ideas, where you can have an honest conversation while also being explicit that you disagree with them. I feel like the secular humanist community, the atheistic community, and the anti-theistic community are really, really, really good at these. And it's something that I think we deserve a lot more credit than we get. It's really frustrating for me because I see a lot of people hold us to higher standards than they hold themselves because they know that these are things that we do. They know that we're open to having conversations with people that we don't agree with. They know that many of us have experienced real intense debates by ourselves. And oftentimes we've been outnumbered. We've had to have frustrating conversations where we're getting hammered on all sides, and we've had to stay calm. We're being held to all sorts of ridiculous standards. And this is a conversation I've had with other people, including Wonder Lady and Godless Iowan in the past, where we talk about like the sort of differences between the standards that we're being held to and the standards that other communities hold themselves to. So we have a lot of experience, and we also stand to benefit a lot from understanding the ways that people who work in this field and people who study this particular academic discipline view these things. I feel like I have some more notes that I could talk about, but also this is just sort of a stream of consciousness thing that I'm really enjoying. I don't really have that many chances to talk about peace and conflict studies in this particular format, because as you guys know, if you follow me on Twitter, I tweet a decent amount about peace and conflict studies, but I don't often get to talk about like the minutia and why it is that I like peace and conflict studies. And I think that that's probably like one of the best cases I could make for peace and conflict studies, especially because like in my university and in the sorts of classes that I've had, I've been able to talk about a whole bunch of really controversial ideas in the context of like the spaces that I'm in, which for those of you who don't know is a university in North Carolina. So most people are religious, even though it's Greensboro, North Carolina, which is by far the most chill city in the state and by far probably the most chill university in the state. But like people have still come after me for talking about like my atheism and being like, hey, I'm an atheist. This is what I think in the context of like religion in peace and conflict studies and the role religion plays in peace and conflict studies. And I'm willing to admit that oftentimes my opinions aren't always the most popular. Like there have been times when I've taken classes that have talked about the intersection of religion and peace and conflict studies. And I've said, hey, we all know that religion can be a force for good in society. But at the same time, we have to be willing to fairly admit that religion can be used for evil, it can be used destructively, and it can be used to exacerbate conflict. And I know that this is an idea that's a little bit difficult to swallow in this context, but it's still an idea that's fair, especially as an atheist who was raised in the South. I've had my fair share of experiences with people who, when they talk to other theists, are very nice, but then when they talk to me, become wholly different people. And I know that odds are every single one of the people in the chat right now, every single one of the people watching, even if you are a theist who is like a minority religion, odds are we've all had this experience in one way or another. And that's something that is really important. We need to speak our truths. And the spaces that peace and conflict studies and scholars and activists in this field create are spaces where we should be able to speak our truths. And I know that there are people who get annoyed with the wording of speak our truth, like truth is like an individual thing. But the reality is experiences are individual. I know plenty of atheists who've had no drama when, what's the The chat section is lighting up. Like, I understand the frustration that people have when it comes to things like speaking your own subjective truth, but it's also worth noting that our experiences are real, and you're going to experience discrimination if you're a religious minority in this country. Now, the kinds of discrimination you're going to experience differ depending on whether you're an atheist, someone who is satanic. I really hope that like the live stream isn't messing up, because like the comments are having me just be a little bit worried that there's something going on, which is super fun. I am going to start to wrap this up, but before I do that, I want to say that there is importance in encouraging people to participate in these sorts of conversations. And these sorts of conversations, the sorts of conversations I'm going to have are going to be difficult for me. It's going to be fun. It's going to be frustrating because I am not someone who is a very good communicator. I feel like people think that I'm a better communicator than I am for a bunch of different reasons. In some cases, it's because I'm bilingual. In other cases, it's because I'm willing to sound like a crazy person talking to myself in front of a microphone, even though I know other people are watching. And also doing like a pretty okay job of it, if I'm being completely honest. This live stream went on considerably longer than I anticipated it being. I actually thought it was only going to be 15 minutes, not 35. But it's fun having these sorts of conversations. I'm going to try to learn as I do this live stream. I'm going to try to get better. And at times I am going to have guests come on. I think it'd be really fun to have other people come on who aren't in the field, and people who are in the field once I get closer to finishing my degree, who can talk with me and can share their own thoughts and can share their own experiences. For those of you who don't know, I recently finished another class and also my first semester as a graduate student. And it's been a very exciting experience for me because this is actually the first time that I'm studying peace and conflict studies as the focus. When I was an undergrad, as I mentioned before, I studied history and anthropology. I didn't study peace and conflict studies. And now that I'm really diving into the field, I'm having a whole lot of fun. I'm learning a whole lot, and I'm gaining the sort of experience that I dreamed I had when I was younger. And this is the sort of work that I've kind of always wanted to do. So for me to be able to do it now is honestly really exciting. Part of the reason I didn't pursue peace and conflict studies as a younger student when I was like an undergrad was because I didn't know that it was a real field for the longest time. And I had this negative impression of it that even when I knew it was a major, I didn't know what sorts of jobs would come with it. That's one of the big things I want to sort of unpack in future episodes. I want to show people what it is that you can do with a degree in this field. If you're someone like me who is a humanistic thinker, regardless of whether or not you're religious, and you want to try and understand how it is that people interact, and you want to try to help people live less violent lives where they are unaffected by violence and where violence doesn't touch them or their communities. This is a viable field of study. This is a thing that people can do and they can make a living off of it. And that's worth saying explicitly. It's also worth showing people, which is one of the big things I want to do with this. I appreciate that you guys turned out and that we got to have this really fantastic chat. I am so looking forward to this. It's going to be every Monday from here on out, unless I say ahead of time that I'm not going to be able to live stream that week, which will probably happen from time to time. But at the very least, there's going to be this week, there's going to be next week, and then there's going to be the week after that. We're going to be able to do all of December, every single Monday for sure. Odds are in the next couple of ones, I'm going to have a guest or two so we can have like real chats. We can have focused conversations because, as you guys can tell, I get really distracted really easily. But I think that that's part of what makes it fun. I am going to be having people, including Wonder Lady, come on if she is available. For those of you who don't know, Wonder Lady is one of my best friends, one of the best compadres out there. And I appreciate that she is always in the comment section, making things lit, helping people have fun. Also, I'm going to say again, for those of you who don't know, be sure to go check out the Women of Deconversion live stream. Tonight they're talking about gluttony. I'm going to be in the comments section, which is part of the reason why I'm not doing an after party tonight. In the future, I probably will do after parties. I think that they're a fun way to unpack what was talked about. But for right now, I don't want to take up too much of everyone's Monday nights. As I get more confident and as more people start to come in regularly, and if people want to do after parties, I'll definitely change my mind. But for right now, I'm going to go drink some water, and then I'm going to go join my friends over there. If you want to send me messages, feel free. I'll definitely be talking with people. I'll be trying to learn what I can do better. I'm hoping that next week I'll be able to focus on like a single thing. Right now, what I really wanted to do was just introduce people to the field. And I think that I did a pretty good job of that. I hope you guys agree. This has been a lot of fun, and I'll talk to you guys later. Also, in case you guys are interested, I'm probably going to need moderators in the comment section, especially if more people start coming up. I'm going to be giving a few people moderator status that I know right now. If other people want to become moderators, especially because being a moderator means you can share links. Although now you might be able to share links without being a moderator. I'm not sure, but I don't think you can. I'm pretty sure that's only a moderator thing. But I am going to be giving people moderator status, especially people that I know fairly well from my own channel and from other streams. So if you guys want to be made moderators, send me a message on Twitter. That's where I am the most active. And I'll see you over on the Women of Deconversion live stream. Peace out, friends.